Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, Numerics with Nadia. In today's lesson, we're going to do a video on absolute value. So we're going to split our lesson up into three main sections. First, we're going to define what absolute value is. Then we're going to find the absolute value using number lines. And then we'll get into a few other types of practice questions. So to start off, we're going to define what absolute value is. The absolute value of an integer is the distance between a number and 0 on a number line. I know that the definition alone maybe doesn't give us too much clarity, but we're also going to go over the notation now, and then we'll get into some practice and looking at it on number lines. So the notation of absolute value is written with vertical bars, as you see with A there. So it's a bar, the letter A, and then another bar. We're going to go through now and use a number line to visually explain the definition and the notation that we've been using. In this example, we will be looking at +5 and -5. We'll start out with the -5. So I will plot where -5 is, and we're looking at the distance between -5 and 0, right? That's what the absolute value is. So between -5 and 0, well, that would be 5 spaces, right? So the absolute value of -5 would just be 5 units. And now we'll look at +5. So for +5, I have that one in blue. We are again 5 units away from 0. So the absolute value of 5 would also be 5 units. And I will also write it down in the proper absolute value notation on the bottom here. So as you'll see, we have the absolute value of -5 equals 5. And we also have that the absolute value of 5 equals 5. So now that we've defined what absolute value is, and now that we've gone over its notation, we're going to get into our practice problems now. We're going to have 3 parts to this. For part 1, the directions say to just find the absolute value using a number line like we just did in the last example. So our first question for number 1, we have to find the absolute value of -6. So we're going to draw our number line out just like we used to do in our other adding and subtracting positive and negative integers video. You can check that video out if you have not watched it yet. But for now, we're labeling our number line. We'll go out to number -6. We'll plot our -6 point, and we're looking at the distance between -6 and 0. So that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 units. So the absolute value of -6 would just be 6, and 6 would be our answer for number 1. Now we'll get into number 2. For number 2, we have the absolute value of 9. So just like before, we're going to draw out our number line and label it. I'll write my 0 a little bit more to the left now since 9 is more on the positive side. So we'll go through and label our number line. We're going to start with our 9. I'll put that in blue, and we're looking for the distance between 9 and 0, right? So we're going over 9 units. So our answer for number 2 would just be 9. Now that we've done a few examples using the number line, we're going to move into our second portion of practice questions for today. For part 2, the directions say to find the absolute value, and this time we're not going to use a number line. We're just going to apply the patterns that we've already recognized to these example questions. So for number 1, we have the absolute value of -10, and we know that that would just be 10, right? Because -10 is 10 units away from 0. Now for number 2, we have the absolute value of 18, and we know that 18 would just be 18 units away from 0. So the answer to number 2 would just be 18. Now for number 3, we have the absolute value of 13. The absolute value of 13, well, 13 is 13 units away from 0, so the answer for 3 would be 13. And for number 4, we have the absolute value of -24. So negative 24 would be 24 units away from 0. So the answer for number 4 would be 24. Now that we've gone through the first two parts of our practice questions, let's get into part 3, our final part. In this part, our directions say to complete the statement using either less than, greater than, or equal to signs. So we're going to be comparing two absolute values here. So for number 1, we have the absolute value of negative 4 compared to 7. So what we're going to do is we're going to draw out our number line and we're going to label both the negative 4 and the 7 to find the distance between those numbers and 0, and then we will be able to compare things more easily. So on the negative side, we'll go out to negative 4, and on the positive side, we'll go out to 7. We'll start out with the negative 4. I'm labeling it in red. The 4 is 4 units away from 0. And now the 7 in blue, the 7 is 7 units away from 0. So we know that the absolute value of negative 4 is 4. And the distance between 7 and 0 is just 7, right? So comparing 4 and 7, we know that 7 is greater. So the absolute value of negative 4 would be less than 7 for number 1. Now that we've gone through that example and we know the steps, feel free to try the next one on your own and pause the video before watching me solve it. For number 2, we have negative 5, and we're comparing that to the absolute value of negative 9. So same as the last problem, we're going to draw out our number line. Both of our numbers here are negative, so I'm going to have my 0 a little bit more on the right. I'm going to go through and make sure that I label the negative 5 and that I label the negative 9. So we're going to start out with the negative 5. Negative 5 is 5 units to the left of 0, right? So that would mean that it's negative 5 units away. But negative 9, since we have the absolute value bars, we know that negative 9 is 9 units away. So if we're comparing negative 5 and 9, we know that 9 is greater. So how we'd fill in our question, we know that negative 5 would be less than the absolute value of negative 9 for number 2. Now we'll move on to our third example for part 3. This will be our last practice question of today. For number 3, we are comparing the absolute value of negative 4 to negative 6. Just like last time, we're going to draw our number line out. Again, for this one, I'm going to have my 0 a little bit further to the right since my values are both negative. I'm going to draw out to the negative 6 point. When I start with negative 4, I have absolute value here, right? So negative 4, well, that is 4 units away from 0. Now I'm going to plot my negative 6. The negative 6 does not have an absolute value bar, so that would make its value negative 6, right? Since it's 6 units to the left of 0. So if we're comparing 4 and negative 6, we know that 4 is greater than negative 6. So the answer for number 3 would be that the absolute value of negative 4 is greater than negative 6. All right, you guys, that is it for today's lesson. I hope you enjoyed learning about absolute value. Please let me know if you have any questions in the comments below, or if you'd like to see any other types of videos. Feel free to leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you guys next time.